Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24 and RFI Radio. We are here in Niamey, Niger, with the president-elect to be sworn in on April 2nd, Mohamed Bazoum. Mr. President, hello and welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for having us. We're joined today by Christophe Boisbouvier from RFI. Hello, Mr. President.
Hello.
Niger has just experienced unprecedented elections with, for the first time, a democratic transition between two elected presidents. An electoral process that was marred by post-election upheaval in the streets of Niamey and other cities throughout Niger. Mr. President, do you not feel that celebration started a little too soon and that current events are marring the grace period that one could hope for in the early days of a presidential term?
No, I don't believe that that's the case. There were some tensions in the city of Niamey, and they lasted less than 2 days. I think that this shows just how artificial the unrest really was. And then after those 2 days, then things simply calmed down, and it just goes to show how inauthentic the unrest was. There were people who said that there would be unrest on the day of the elections, and they announced that there would be demonstrations before we had any idea what the result would be of the elections. That being said, we would have rathered not have any unrest at all, because it's the first time we're seeing this kind of thing, but today it's behind us.
So there were protests, but more importantly, there were also terrorist attacks. While campaigning, Mr. President, you stated, deadly attacks against military camps such as Inates and Chinegweda have ceased. We have found ways of foiling future attempts. But unfortunately, we now see that civilians are being massacred. 66 dead near Banibangu in the Tillaberi region, 137 in Tilia in the Tahoua region. Do you not feel that jihadists from ISGS, Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, are challenging you right as you are taking over reins of the country?
I do not believe that the current situation is related to the elections and the results. What we're seeing today comes from what's going on in the field, the relations between the jihadists and the communities that they're trying to control. Regarding Tilia, what we've known for a while now is that there are lots of biker gangs in the region, and they levy what they know as the zakat, a tithe, and they take this from the people that they are able to control to some degree. But over the last weeks, because of the presence of heavy patrols from the National Guard of the country, and because of a change in the northern Y region, we have seen local people who are less willing to pay this tithe to the biker gangs. And it's very likely that what happened was a direct consequence of that change. What I do know is that a number of weeks ago, the jihadists came in and they went to meet with the Ifo-Akitan people and said, it's not enough that you pay the zakat, the tithe. They told them, if you endorse our vision of Islam, then you need to show that you're on our side and you need to give us young people who will fight for us in our ranks and fight for Islam. Throughout these negotiations, the Ifo-Akitan people said that they would not be providing these fighters to them. The gang's response was to say that if they didn't get these fighters, then they would attack because they would take that as them pledging allegiance to the regime rather than to Islam. So that's the situation, and I think that what we're seeing today is much more related to what we're seeing locally rather than what we're seeing at the national level.
Mr. President, a recent report from the NGO International Crisis Group suggests that during attacks on the 15th and 21st of March, the assailants returned to seek revenge for some of their own who had been killed. That raises a question. Is Niger, much like some of its neighboring countries, not falling into a spiral of sectarian violence?
Of course, when you see this kind of action, when you see widespread killings targeted against a particular population, because you should know that they had clearly identified their targets before they acted, and they actually sorted through the people when they found them in the field. And that, of course, leads to a risk of community-based conflict, because the jihadists come from some particular communities, unfortunately, and the people that they attack, unfortunately, also belong to specific communities. Our challenge is to make sure that the situation doesn't escalate and to make sure that it doesn't spill over and becomes anything larger than the kind of rogue operations that we see against people in the regions. And we need to defend the people against these rogue operations, and that is what we do as a state, and we will take up that challenge.
So you will take up that challenge. I imagine that means you will be increasing army recruitments. However, in neighboring Mali, the Prime Minister clearly stated that there will have to be negotiations with jihadists. In Niger, are we not witnessing the limits of a strong-handed solution? Is it not time to change strategy and open up communications with some jihadist groups?
There are different situations in Mali and Niger. They're not the same, and you can't really compare them. We could not open dialogue with them because there are no jihadist commanders in Niger. There are no bases for the jihadists in Niger. And there have been no statements from major ISGS commanders related to Niger. That being said, in April 2016, when I was heading up the Ministry for the Interior, I did try to open up a channel for dialogue with them, and I sent emissaries to meet with young ISGS members fighting in the field in Niger. Their response was to say that they were only interested in the jihad in Mali, not with what was going on in Niger. And I told them through these emissaries that I was willing to open negotiations with them and to tell them that if you are from Niger, even if you're a part of a particular community and you have demands, you have needs related to governance, related to your living conditions, in that case, we would be willing to listen to them, listen to those demands. They sent a list of 22 people in response, of people who were being held in our prisons, telling me that these were friends of theirs who'd been arrested by the army and they wanted them to be freed. They set an ultimatum date at the end of February 2017, and they told me that at that date they would stop observing the ceasefire that had been in place since I joined the ministry and since I opened up channels for discussion with them. At the end of February, they did indeed attack us, and the situation has gotten worse since. We don't have Nigerians, we don't have Nigerian partners. We have North Africans commanding the ISGS forces who are carrying out a jihad in Mali. At least that's their position, and who sometimes have operations that spill over into Niger. We can't negotiate with people who aren't Nigerians, and because there are no Nigerians that we can discuss things with, then there's not much we can do, and you shouldn't compare our situation to what's going on in Mali.
That takes us quite naturally onto another topic, if you'll allow me, that of the coalition armed forces against terrorism. I'm sure you're aware that there is an electoral campaign starting in France quite shortly, during which the French president will have to take a stance on Barkhane. It's an operation that is expensive and increasingly unpopular in French opinion. So if, very concretely speaking, the French were to even partially or completely withdraw, would you feel like there's unfinished business, or would you feel as if France had abandoned Niger?
No, we wouldn't see that as being abandoned by the French. Barkhane is mainly a Mali-based operation. That's the first thing you need to remember. Of course, as we cooperate with the French army, we would have preferred to see better results than what we've seen up until today. and that relative shortfalling is a shared one across the entire coalition. France withdrawing troops, so long as they maintain their air force presence, would not have a major impact on the situation and on the balance of power in the region. As you know, the French army does not have boots on the ground fighting against the jihadists. The way operations are carried out for this operation actually aim to keep human losses as low as possible. And this means that the French army acts in a way that means that even if some troops were withdrawn, it wouldn't have a big operational impact. Should we say it would be more symbolic and political than actually operational? What we do need, however, is the air superiority from the French forces, which, as I understand it, would be guaranteed no matter how many troops were withdrawn from the country if that were to happen.
Let's turn back to Nigerian politics. For a month now, the former Prime Minister Hama Amadou, who is one of your main opponents, has been in prison. The prosecutor has accused him of inciting race-based hatred and making racist remarks. Why was he arrested in March?
I am neither the prosecutor nor the Minister for Justice, so I'm not able to answer that question, Mr. Boisbouvier.
And since your victory has been announced, I'm sure you've come to realize that the former Prime Minister has made no further seditious comments. So if this situation is to remain calm, would you possibly envisage having him set free?
That's a question that hasn't been asked at this point, so I couldn't answer at this point either.
Let's now talk about some of the major challenges that await you during your term. The fight against corruption, which was one of the major campaign topics raised by the opposition. For example, there was an audit that showed that 76 billion CFA francs were embezzled as part of an arms contract by the Defense Ministry. In this specific case, will the guilty be taken to court?
One could imagine that if there are guilty parties, and I'm sure there are, then they will have their day in court and we will make sure that that happens. But I have to say that there has not been an audit of the figures. The reality of the situation is actually quite different from what some people understand of the situation. That being said, at the Ministry for Defense in Niger, under our government, things happened that we don't agree with, with which President Issoufou does not agree, and that is why he called for looking further into what was going on. And there are some things that happened that must be punished. We will make sure that there is no impunity when Nigerians commit this kind of thing.
Mr. President, you are about to govern a country that is suffering from poverty. 40% of the population living on less than $2 a day. They are kept in a state of poverty predominantly by the birth rate, 7 children per woman on average, highest in the world. So how are you going to succeed in meeting this challenge where all your predecessors have failed?
I want to promote education in our country. It seems fundamentally important to me, and I particularly want to underline the importance of educating young girls, and doing so in a way that is different from what we've seen up until now. We want to make sure that young girls stay in school. To achieve this, I want to create boarding schools in local middle schools. And this is for the villages. We have what we call rural middle schools in Niger. And in these places, I want to create boarding schools for young female pupils. Because very often, when a young girl starts middle school, in a school away from the village where her parents live, the parents end up feeling that her moving away is neither good for her education at school, but also is bad for her education at home. So they pull her out of school. By building a lot of boarding schools in these local middle schools, we hope to protect these young girls from early marriage. By keeping girls in school up until 18, we will protect girls from early marriage and maybe from having a few children, 1, 2, maybe 3. 77% of Nigerian girls are married before 18, and 28% of them are married before they're 15. If we massively educate young girls and keep them in schools for a long time, we have a strong way through which we can fight against these early child marriages and also protecting them from giving birth before they're even 15. It's a big challenge, and we are talking openly about it. President Issoufou has courageously addressed this topic, and we will remain strong, and we will make sure that we discuss this problem openly.
Mr. President, thank you for taking time for our interview, and thank you for tuning in to France 24 and Radio France Internationale.
Thank you very much.